Hello, welcome to Only in Illinois, your weekly video recap from Reboot Illinois. I'm Madeline Dubeck here with Matt Dietrich, and what a wild and crazy election we just survived. We had quite a few unexpected developments nationwide and within Illinois. After spending boatloads of cash, the governor trying to win back some legislative seats from the Democratic majority. He actually succeeded in chipping away at the supermajority in the House.
He ended the supermajority in the House.
So, how does it all shake out, Matt?
Well, in this General Assembly election, we saw $60 million poured in. $45 million of that came from the governor.
Rauner.
And the idea was to chip away at these supermajorities that allow both the democratically controlled House and Senate. If they can band all their Democrats together, they can override anything that Governor Rauner vetoes. So what happened in the House was they managed to knock off 4 incumbents. Actually, the net gain was 4 seats.
Okay.
They picked up an empty seat. They knocked off 4 incumbents, but then the Democrats picked up one of the seats down in the Metro East area. Net result is that House Speaker Michael Madigan, who used to have 71 members, which was a 3/5 majority,
Exactly.
right, now has 67 members. So Democrats on their own can't override any veto by Governor Rauner. Now, it's worth emphasizing that even when Madigan had that supermajority veto power, he was never able to get all 71 Democrats together to override anything that was near and dear to his heart and that would have been a major defeat to Rauner. Namely, that would be the millionaire tax was a big one. The other one was passing a progressive income tax. You couldn't get all 71 on board for those. Effectively, it wasn't really a working supermajority. So
there was also an AFSCME related effort to try to take power away from the governor.
And you had a disloyal member who then
Ken Duncan
got primaried out and will not be in the General Assembly as of January. So you can interpret that as you want. And of course, our leaders did interpret it as they want. And you had House Republican leader Jim Durkin put out a statement that clearly this is evidence that it's time for the Democrats to come around and vote on some of Governor Rauner's turnaround agenda and get a budget passed. Meanwhile, Speaker Madigan, of course, says, I still have 67 members. This is clear evidence that the voters of Illinois favor a Democratic majority. Therefore, it's time for Bruce Rauner to give up his turnaround agenda and come to my side.
And we will continue to protect the middle class and
yes,
blue-collar workers.
Right, and we won't put injured workers in the emergency room or people on welfare, et cetera, et cetera. Now in the Senate, you also had the Republicans there were able to pick up 2 seats. So, but the Senate, John Cullerton, who's president of the Senate, still has a supermajority there. He can override vetoes in that chamber with his members. There are 37 Democrats. There will be 37 Democrats as of January 11th when the new General Assembly is sworn in. That's still a supermajority. You need 30 votes to pass a bill in the Senate, and they've got 37. So in the House, you need 60, and they still have 67. So Democrats are still very much in control, but Rauner did make a dent in that. Some say that this was a significant victory for Rauner because in a presidential election year in Illinois, it is almost always favorable to the Democrats.
Yes.
The last time a Republican incumbent U.S. Senator won re-election in a presidential election year in Illinois was 1972, Charles Percy.
And the last time Illinois voted for a Republican for president was 1988, George H.W. Bush.
There was some significance to even getting these kind of gains in this election year.
And with a map that the Democrats drew.
They have drawn twice. They drew it in 2000, then they were able to further refine it in 2010. So I think there is some significance to it. However, when it comes down to it,
Nothing's really changed.
It's still only 4 seats, and you still have strong Democratic majorities. But we saw 60 million poured into these races this year. I think 2018, that's going to look like peanuts.
So, and from Rauner's perspective, it cost him about between $9 and $10 million per seat he gained.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the numbers were really astounding. And also there was huge money put into the comptroller's race.
Right.
That was a very important race, and usually when there is a election for constitutional officers, comptroller is
Barely
last
mentioned.
item on the undercard, because the comptroller is the keeper of the state's checkbook. Now, though, keeper of the state's checkbook is a pretty darn important job because we don't have a budget. So it falls to the comptroller to determine what bills get paid, what can't get paid.
What priority they get paid in.
Mm-hmm. And also it fell to Comptroller Leslie Munger in the summer of 2015 to go to court and effectively testify against her own office in a lawsuit. AFSCME brought a lawsuit saying that state employees had to be paid even if there was no budget to pay them. Attorney General Lisa Madigan said, no, the Constitution says you cannot pay employees if you don't have a budget authorizing it. Leslie Munger appeared, her office appeared in court in St. Clair County in a lawsuit in which the AFSCME Council 31 was the plaintiff and Leslie Munger was the defendant. Her office testified on the side of the plaintiffs to keep government employees paid even when there's no budget.
Right.
That lets government function, that lets the budget, that lets us go on so that the governor can hold his ground in his fight with Madigan. He can keep saying he's not going to negotiate on a budget until we get some reforms. I don't think the new comptroller, Susana Mendoza, who was elected Tuesday, is going to be so helpful.
She's always taken the opportunity to be very pointed in her criticism of Governor Rauner.
Mm-hmm.
It's never been the case, ever in the history of our state, that a governor has been elected and said, you either pass what I want or I won't even think about passing a budget. And that's...
Don't you, I mean, different point of view from you.
Mm-hmm.
I think that she is going to do what her mentor, Mike Madigan, wants her to do, which is to drag this out as long as possible to try to make the governor wear the jacket on this and look bad.
That could happen, but I think probably what happens too is when certain bills need to get paid, if the governor's office gets pressure and needs things to be done, they're probably calling the comptroller now and saying, could you please, take care of this? Can you
move this one
You're
up?
not going to be able to do that anymore
Yeah,
when Susana Mendoza's there.
that's true.
There also, as I think we talked about this last week too, there is a Supreme Court decision that's just sitting out there waiting to be brought up in another lawsuit that I think would stop those employee paychecks and would pretty well shut down government. I don't know that Mendoza's office, when I talked to them last week, was not really interested in getting into that just yet.
Right.
But I
that
suspect,
could change.
but I suspect you'll see it. Now, you won't see cooperation between the governor and the comptroller anymore, and that's going to create, the comptroller can create some chaos, and depending on the choices, as you point out, Madeline, if you make choices that end up favorable to Mike Madigan, that's going to be a problem for the governor.
Yep. So that will be one to keep an eye on.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
And two other things that we should probably mention.
Yes.
The big race for the state of Illinois, of course, was in the U.S. Senate, and that was Tammy Duckworth defeated Mark Kirk, and she defeated him fairly handily. And if you were following along on election night, you probably started getting email alerts about 7:03 that Illinois had been called for Duckworth.
Right, that one was over pretty quickly.
This one, we knew probably what the result was going to be. What was interesting was how the result paralleled the presidential count in Illinois.
It did. And so that was, Duckworth got about 54% of the vote.
Mm-hmm.
Mark Kirk got about 40%. Donald Trump got 39% of the vote in Illinois. Hillary Clinton got 55% of the vote and carried Illinois, and Illinois really became kind of a blue island in the Midwest, surrounded by Republican Trump states.
Well, and if you look at a map of Illinois, you can kind of see what's shaping up in 2018. This is going to be a challenge for the downstate Democrats. That map went very, very, very red once you get out. Even in this race where you had a lot of Donald Trump skeptics among Republicans, it is almost completely red with a few patches of blue. I think that could be a problem for Democrats going forward, because if these districts start going Republican, it's going to be hard to get back in there and knock those incumbents out, whether you draw the map or not.
That's true. Although the off-year, non-presidential election years tend to be a little bit. By then, Donald Trump will have some.
There'll be some backlash. There always is.
People who won't look so favorably toward him, because that's just historically what happens in those off-year elections. So it'll be interesting to see. All right. So next week, the legislature reconvenes and there's a veto session, and the governor has asked for the leaders to meet with him on Monday.
Don't know yet if that's going to happen.
Don't know if it'll happen. Don't know how cooperative the Democrats will be. Doesn't sound like they're inclined to be very cooperative, because, as we've noted, they still hold the majorities. And they're getting ready to try to override a couple of the governor's vetoes.
And they're going to be, they have no choice. They'll have to get together on something by December 31st, because the temporary so-called budget that we have in place now, that's barely keeping things running, barely keeping the universities funded, runs out the last day of the calendar year. They're going to have to get something in place. My guess is probably that they'll go back and do another 6-month plan. It's looking like we're going to see this one after another, unfortunately.
So is your prediction that they're going to be meeting on New Year's Eve to approve a plan?
Well, that's kind of what happened over the summer when we went beyond. I don't actually. They'll probably go into January a bit. I would think they'll probably let the deadline pass, as happened in July.
Right.
You do have a lame duck General Assembly. Right. You have some members in there who are not going to be coming back. They'll be free to take controversial votes if needed. Who knows? That's when they do things like pass
67% income tax increases. All right. So it's an important time to pay attention. Just because you voted on Tuesday, your job isn't over. That was just step one. So we need to all keep an eye on our lawmakers and hold them accountable and keep in touch with them. So that's it for this week's edition. We'll see you on the next edition of Only in Illinois.